Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes for the last few people to chime in. If someone can just type a yes if you can hear me okay, that would be great.
Raise your hand if you can see the screen as well.
Oh, that's a bad sign. If someone can hear the audio, if you wouldn't mind just typing yes, that would be great. Oh, perfect, thank you. Okay, so this morning's webinar topic is probably 3 countries that we very rarely get an inquiry for, and maybe that some of you have never even heard of. Guyana, Suriname and French Guiana. I'm going to be honest and say I probably know less about these countries than any other country in Latin America, so please don't bamboozle me with really tricky questions. But it's definitely 3 countries that I would love to visit because they have some of the most amazing wildlife and wilderness areas in the whole of Latin America. The photo you see here on the front screen is Kaieteur Falls, which is one of the more famous sites within Guyana. So let's get started. The first country we're going to start off with is Guyana. So this was once a British colony. As such, English is their national official language, plus they also have 9 regional dialects and Creole languages as well as Indigenous languages. The capital is Georgetown, which contains almost a quarter of the country's population. And getting to Guyana can be a little bit tricky. It's a long way from Australia, and basically the easiest way of getting in and out is from either Miami or New York. If you happen to have passengers visiting the Caribbean, there's also flights from Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados as well. And then there's also overland transfers to and from Suriname. And for the very, very adventurous, there's also transfers through the bottom of the country here out into Brazil. And what that basically brings you through to is eventually Manaus. But as I said, it's only for the seriously adventurous. No visas are required for Australian passport holders, which is great news. And probably the most interesting fact about Guyana is that it receives around 3,000 tourists a year, which is pretty much what Machu Picchu gets in one day. So that gives you a pretty good idea of how many other tourists you're likely to see on the ground when you visit. This is probably a better map of Guyana for our purposes. It shows very clearly where all the lodges are in relation to the towns. So most of the people, obviously people visiting Guyana are there to see the wilderness and the wildlife. Of course, you're going to spend a couple of days in Georgetown while you're there, but really it's the lodges and the interior of the country that's the massive draw card. The infrastructure within Guyana is quite limited. So you've got one major road running from more or less north to south in the country, and then access off that major road is either by river or by very rough dirt roads. And calling this a major highway is also a bit of a misnomer because outside of, I think, about this far out of Georgetown, it turns into a dirt road. So it's a rugged country to travel in, and definitely not for the faint-hearted. It can be a little bit tricky finding the perfect time to travel within Guyana. 80% of the country is covered in rainforest, so obviously it does receive quite a lot of rainfall during the year. The busiest months are September to November and January to April, that being the driest months. Things to see and do, you've got the capital Georgetown, which deserves maybe a couple of nights. Kaieteur Falls, which you can do as a full day tour in a light plane from Georgetown. The Iwak Canopy Walkway, which is sort of in the central part of the country here. And then you've got the Rupununi Savannah, which is sort of around this area. Wildlife. That is the major draw card for Guyana. As I said, 80% of the country is covered in rainforest, and it's home to some really incredible mammal and bird life species. So Georgetown is quite a crazy place, actually. They've got some really interesting English and Dutch influenced architecture. As you can see here, one of the biggest freestanding wooden buildings in the world. It's also an incredibly multicultural place, so that you can find African, Indian, Caribbean, Native American descended people there. So it's a very vibrant place and fantastic for food. As I said, outside of to visit Kaieteur Falls, you can take a charter flight from the capital, and they mostly combine that with Orendijk Fells as well. Sorry, Kaieteur is actually 5 times the height of Niagara, and it's the world's highest free-falling waterfall. The beauty of the falls is really that when you're there, nobody else is there. So if you think about going to Niagara or Iguazu, or even Victoria Falls, when you're there, you're going to see thousands of other tourists. At Kaieteur, you can be almost guaranteed of seeing pretty much no one else. Because it has to be visited by charter flight or by an extremely arduous overland trek, realistically only a handful of people can visit the falls every day. The day trips take around 7 to 8 hours from Georgetown, and you spend around 2 hours on the ground at each set of waterfalls. Lodges in the interior, one of the more famous ones is Karanambu. You can access this lodge via, again, a flight from Georgetown to the Rupununi Savannah, and then a 4-wheel drive road transfer to the lodge. As you can see, the lodgings are fairly basic. This is not a 5-star destination. People go to be in the wilderness and to be in remote areas. And just because of the infrastructure within the country, the accommodation is necessarily relatively basic. Having said that, though, the cabins do all have private facilities, showers, flush toilets. You've got mosquito beds over the nets because the cabins, although you can't really see it, where the roof and the wall meet, there's a small gap to allow ventilation. So the mosquito nets are pretty important. Obviously, at the lodges, everything is included because you're a million miles from anywhere. And they do have 24-hour solar electricity as well. This lodge is particularly famous for Diane McTurk's work, rehabilitating wild river otters, as you can see here, which is super cute. So you've got an extremely good chance of seeing the river otters at this lodge. Over 300 species of birds, which is amazing. Also giant anteaters, howler monkeys, capybara. So for wildlife lovers, this is really one of the best destinations in South America, I think. Most of the lodges will offer a similar range of activities, being trips by river, hikes. You've got 4-wheel drive sightseeing to take you a bit further afield, and obviously wildlife spotting. Surama Ecolodge you can actually get to from road transfer from Karanambu, or you can also fly in via an eye. We can just go back to the other map for a second. So there you've got an eye airstrip, and Karanambu just here, so accessible by river, and Surama is here. So again, fairly basic constructions here, little freestanding cabins with a flush toilet, shower and sink in there. The cabins are screened, and you've also got mosquito nets as well. Limited solar electricity in this particular lodge, over 500 species of birds. And this lodge is particularly appealing because it's owned and managed exclusively by the Mapuche Amity Indian people. So great for community engagement kind of activities, tours of the village, and seeing how the people live still very traditionally in Surama. Atta Rainforest Lodge is particularly famous because it's located at the base of or just about at the base of the Iwakarama Canopy Walkway. This is a series of suspension bridges ranging from about 15 to 30 metres in height, and it's almost 154 metres long. So a very extensive walkway up here in the canopy, which really gives you a sense of how vast the rainforest is in this particular area, and also hopefully gives you the chance to see some of the crazy bird life they have here. This is an Andean cock of the rock bird, which is definitely high on people's list of things they want to see. And again, you've got kind of the relatively basic lodges. This is probably one of the more fancy, if I can say that, lodges, with the rooms here with the mosquito nets again. They normally say that one night is probably enough to have at this particular lodge, so just so you have enough time to go up and do the canopy walkway. And you can combine this with either Surama or Rockview or Iwakarama, which are also in the area. Next up we have Suriname, which is the only Dutch-speaking country in South America. Population of just 600,000 people, and more than a third of those live in the capital, so that gives you an idea of the how populated the interior is. Languages are, the main ones are Dutch. You've also got Caribbean Hindustani, Javanese and Bhojpuri, which I hope I didn't mangle too badly. So again, a really multinational, multi-ethnic country. In Paramaribo, the capital, you really notice that straight away. Again, you've got direct flights to and from Miami, as well as Curaçao, which is another Dutch former dependency, and Georgetown as well. Australians do require a visa for Suriname. It must be issued prior to arrival, and it can be quite complicated because there's no representation here in Australia. So unless your passengers are going to Guyana or French Guiana first, it can be quite a headache. So it's just one more good reason to visit one of the neighbouring countries, really. Again, best time to travel, you've got the dry seasons of roughly February to April and August to November, which tends to be the busiest time. This is a cute little river, which I love. You've got the capital, Paramaribo, which I said is a really great place to spend a couple of days just to get a sense of just how diverse Suriname's population is. And then outside the capital, we've got the Commonwealth Plantation District, which has a lot of interesting kind of colonial history, and Galabi, which is famous for the green turtles and the leatherbacks, actually. And then again, the interior of the country is really where people need to be to see some of that great wildlife. In Paramaribo, you've got, again, that really unique kind of wooden architecture. This is the synagogue and the mosque. So as you can see, it's very like multi-ethnic, multi-faith, and very, yeah, it's a really interesting place to spend a couple of days. You've also got the Amerindian population, African descendants, and Indian and Chinese from the colonial period who moved here. Fort Zeelandia, so again, some of that Dutch history, and then you can do day tours out to some of the wildlife areas as well. Dolphin spotting tours are very popular. They're almost guaranteed, I would say, of seeing dolphins on the day tours from Paramaribo. And then in the interior, you've got some of these lodges again. So Danpaati is again one of the more luxurious ones. About 6 hours by road and boat from Paramaribo. As you can see, these cabins are a little bit more lush. They've got the private facilities again, electricity, hammocks, mosquito nets, a swimming pool, which is fantastic because it does get obviously pretty hot and steamy during some times of the year. And this is another really interesting place culturally because it's the people are descended from escaped slaves. So back during the colonial period, this happened in Colombia as well. Slaves would escape from the trading ports and disappear into the interior where it was very difficult to find them. And these communities still, you know, lasted until today. So culturally, it's really fascinating. Excuse me. So yeah, people come to this lodge mainly to see the wildlife, but it's also really interesting to go and see the native villages, see some cultural performances where you really get the sense of the African history and music and dance and how that's lasted through until today. And lastly, we've got French Guiana, probably the hardest to get to and most expensive of the three. They deal with, it's actually a French overseas department, so it is considered part of the European Union. They use the euro as the national currency, and it has a population of just 250,000 people. Quite difficult to get into. It's a relatively expensive overland transfer from Suriname, but you do have direct flights from Miami and even Paris, which is quite amazing. No visas required for Australian passport holders because it is part of the EU. Again, very multicultural society. You've even got a group of Hmong Vietnamese, Laos and Hmong people that migrated a very long time ago to the cacao. So that's quite a spin out for a lot of Australians who perhaps have been to Laos or Vietnam and seen the Hmong Hill Tribe people there. French Guiana is probably most famous for Devil's Island. So if any of you have seen the film Papillon or read the book, that is based on Devil's Island penal colony. And the boat tours out there are really fascinating. I guess from an Australian point of view, we can really appreciate that kind of colonial and penal colony history. Another good thing for people, well, another thing that people really know about and particularly request is a visit to the Guyana Space Agency, which is based at Karoo. And if you're very lucky, you can time it to actually see a shuttle launch, which is, yeah, kind of amazing. This is the page for Guyana and Suriname in our brochure. don't get a huge amount of inquiries for these countries. As I say, a lot of people have never even heard of them, but the people who do inquire are normally very serious and they've done their homework and they know what they want to see and do. Certainly for photographers, wildlife enthusiasts, birders, you really can't go past Guyana and Suriname in particular for, yeah, probably some of the best wildlife viewing in the world. Finally, we've got the question for today. So to go into the draw for a place on the next meal, you have to email your answers, please, to contours@contourstravel.com.au and let us know how many tourists does Guyana get per year. Thanks a lot for attending this morning. If you've got any questions, please let me know, but as I say, don't throw anything too curly at me. No? Fantastic. If you do think of any questions or if you'd like to know anything else about any other countries in South America, please do send an email or give us a call and we're happy to chat with you anytime. Thanks again for joining and we will see you in a couple of weeks for Paraguay and Uruguay, I think.